So the first talk will be given by Gové from University of St. Andrews. Jean will give a talk on extended mind, extended person, and extended soul.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jean Gové, and I will be giving my presentation this morning on extended minds, extended persons, extended souls. Before beginning, a word of thanks for the opportunity to give this talk, as well as for the organizers for the impeccable organization given the current circumstances, and a word of welcome. As you can see, I'm recording this from home. I would have preferred to use the university offices, but I am currently under quarantine at the time of recording. So welcome home, maybe slightly more informal than normal, but the situation dictates so. So let's get down to the proper presentation. So the article revolves around the notion of distributed cognition. Distributed cognition, the idea that entities external to one's organic brain participate in one's overall cognitive functioning, is understood by functionalists in philosophy of mind to imply that mind is extended outwards of the brain. Some go a step further and assert that since the mind is extended, then so is the person. I argue that these issues are posing new challenges not only to physicalism, but also to dualism and to hylomorphic theories of mind. In fact, the aim of this paper is to investigate whether there is a way in which the dualist or the hylomorphist may accept the notion of distributed cognition, without necessarily accepting the notions of extended mind, personhood, or even extended souls. While the dualist and the hylomorphist may choose to dismiss the notion of distributed cognition altogether, as some physicalists have done, I shall attempt to elucidate a second route available that will allow for a non-physicalist reformulation while still accepting the notion of distributed cognition. So, what is distributed cognition? The idea is that the mind, or at the very least cognition, is not only located within the brain, but rather extends outwards. While still the topic of much debate, it seems that external objects share in the cognitive process and thus constitute our cognitive apparatus. Thus, objects around us, such as mobile phones, tablets, or even less technologically advanced artifacts, such as notebooks or diaries, enable us to offload parts of the cognitive process in order to help us to carry out specific tasks. Furthermore, distributed cognition also implies what Clark and Chalmers termed as the extended self. If the person is where the mind is, and if the mind is extended, then it follows that the person is also extended. I shall refer to this as extended. We should, however, underline a significant objection against distributed cognition, which states that while elements of the external world causally interact with the brain, it does not necessarily follow that these extraneural entities partly constitute cognition. Furthermore, related to distributed cognition is the reality of neuroprosthesis. In these situations, similar to replacing an organic heart with an artificial one, defective parts of the brain are replaced by artificial replacements. Some types of neuroprosthesis are already widely used, such as cochlear implants. Yet we can imagine a situation in which every part of the brain is slowly replaced by an inorganic counterpart, arriving to the point where there are no organic parts left. We can call this an instance of an inorganic self, or as I shall refer to it now as inorganic. Thus, what extended and inorganic both show us is that our intuition that cognitive processes are limited only to organic matter is false. In this sense, it no longer makes sense to speak of the brain, but rather of the cognitive system, which incorporates all the organic and inorganic entities that constitute cognition. I shall now explore how the dualist, materialist, and the hylomorphist react to these notions. To do this, I shall consider Lynn Ruther-Baker's constitution view as a physicalist view, Aristotle's conception of persons as soul and body as a hylomorphic view, and Richard Swinburne's reinterpretation of Cartesian dualism. The first, Baker views the person as being constituted by the body, having what she terms as a capacity for first person's perspective. Unlike other physicalists, Baker does not accept extended. She separates cognition and mind by introducing a separation between personal and subpersonal states. Whatever happens on a personal level pertaining to mind are those mental states which I am consciously aware of. On the other hand, whatever happens on a sub-personal level, the level of cognition, I am not consciously aware of and may be extended. Baker's aim therefore is to show that while instances of cognition may occasionally extend out of one's physical body, this does not mean that the person, or her mind for that matter, also extends outwards. Baker asserts that shifting and transitory hybrids can hardly be persons, and thus rejects the notion of extended. However, this seems question-begging. It seems that Baker's attempt to reconcile distributed cognition with her constitution view seem like trying to hammer a square peg into a round hole. For example, some argue that the separation between personal and subpersonal states is itself unsupported by contemporary cognitive science and thus seems somewhat ad hoc. It should be noted that while Baker is unsympathetic to the notion of extended, she is less so towards the notion of inorganic. She asserts that mind arises out of an organic body, but can also incorporate inorganic parts, as long as such parts form a single physical entity. Moving on, what about hylomorphism? Aristotle held, as we all know, that all living things have a soul, consisting of three main capacities: nutrition, perception, and intellect. While all living things exhibit nutrition, only animals exhibit nutrition and perception, and only humans exhibit all three faculties. Aristotle could have never conceived of the world we inhabit today, yet in his metaphysics book Z, he comments on men not necessarily being made of flesh and bones. What then should restrict us from considering only organic matter in Aristotle's dichotomy of matter and form? Nothing, I believe. To hold a contrary position would be to exert a form of organic chauvinism. Dualism is not in a better position either. Swinburne's Cartesian dualism states that the soul is the material entity that experiences mental states and undergoes mental events. These are differentiated from the brain that has brain states and brain events. The relationship between the two is such that the brain and the soul causally interact with one another. From what has already been said before, a more precise way for Swinburne to state the above would be to say that each human soul interacts with a cognitive system. Furthermore, Swinburne articulates the location of the soul as being where brain and soul causally interact with one another. Thus, we could theoretically be in a position to say that the soul of a particular individual is either located in some inorganic substance or possibly even extended outward of the brain. All that has been said thus far implies some serious consequences for both the hylomorphist and the dualist. For both theories, inorganic and extended lead to having to consider the inorganic parts that participate in the overall cognitive system of an individual as deserving of the same ethical value accorded to the rest of the body, in virtue of being in relation to the soul. Where does this leave us? Proponents of either theory may choose to bite the bullet and accept that the inorganic parts should be accorded the same ethical value, given that the soul is present in these parts, or alternatively dismiss the notion of extended and inorganic outrightly. I propose yet another alternative, one that can still respect the empirical evidence in favor of inorganic and extended parts, yet still restricting ethical value to the organic living body only. This, I argue, can be done by a separation of the notions of soul and mind. The concept of soul has a much longer history than that of mind. Crucially, while mind has always had the function of mentality pertaining to thinking, the notion of soul, on the other hand, especially prior to Descartes, held within it not only mentality, but also identity, vitality, and more functions. In this regard, I agree with Bremer that over time the thinking Cartesian soul was itself identified with the entirety of the Aristotelian soul. Therefore, one soul conceived in Aristotelian terms must remain the basis for ascribing ethical value to the organic individual in the relationship between matter and form. Aristotle speaks of the human body as having such a soul because it carries out and exhibits the three capabilities already mentioned. In this sense, therefore, at least in the case of extended, we already have a manner in which we can exclude such external entities from the hylomorphic unity. Because even if we were to agree with the assertion that such entities participate in the cognitive process, they do not exhibit the other two functions of the soul, namely nutrition and perception. A crude litmus test would therefore be to say that in cases of distributed cognition, the Aristotelian soul resides in the organic body which is animated by unitary life. A crucial clarificatory note should now be inserted here before going further. Some philosophers use the terms mental and cognitive interchangeably. However, Clarke and Chalmers do not consider all instances of cognition to be instances of mind, at least in the physicalist sense. This distinction between what is mental and what is cognitive, distinct from Baker's separation above, is of utmost importance, and I hold the key to attempting this reformulation. It seems at first that the philosopher cannot both hold that cognition extends outwards of the organic body, and assert that these inorganic external entities do not relate with the soul. Yet this separation between mental and cognitive would allow the hylomorphist to do both. Here we may again appeal to the physicalist literature for clarity. Clarke formulates what he calls the hypothesis of organism-centered cognition, which states the following. Human cognitive processing sometimes extends into the environment surrounding the organism, but the organism remains the core and currently the most active element of cognition. Cognition is organism-centered even when it is not organism-bound. Transposing this hypothesis onto our present debate, we can say that wherever human cognition is present, the soul extends up to and only to the space that is animated by the same unitary life that animates the organic part of the mind. We can still call the cognitive processes that take place in the other inorganic entities as properly mine, precisely because of this hypothesis. It is my cognition because it is centered around my organic body, which in turn is animated by my soul. Yet we have not fully bridged the gap between living organic body and the external organic entities that participate in cognition. How can we speak of these different entities as truly being cognitive, while the soul remaining the locus of what is mental? The external entities are truly cognitive only insofar as the organism around which cognition is centered is animated by a soul having the capacity for mind. This could be another contemporary complementary interpretation of the controversial divide Aristotle makes between the passive and the active intellect in De Anima, Book 3. While many interpretations exist on this particular issue within Aristotelian commentary, the fact remains that Aristotle articulates the soul's capacity of intellect or mind in two ways, only one of which seems to be able to exist outside of the body. The soul's capacity of having a part of the mind that must remain embodied, and another that need not do so, might be conceived of as the Aristotelian equivalent of the hypothesis articulated above. Thus, Aristotle's active mind affords us the possibility to maintain at the same time the hylomorphic unity, while also reconciling the notion of distributed cognition as articulated in extended and in organic. In this light, more work still needs to be done. My proposal is only that recent advances within neuroscience can be integrated within Aristotelian non-physicalist framework. This is not to say that they should be. Even in the cases of inorganic and extended, as articulated here, they were within the realm of science fiction a few decades ago. At the same way, similarly, the future still holds possibility that we have yet to imagine or conceive of. The realities of neuroprosthesis and distributed cognition will seem insignificant when compared to greater transhumanist issues that are slowly coming to the fore. Issues which will need, again, a greater examination and reflection. The role of the philosopher, as always, remains the same, from Aristotle up until today. We must continually strive, not necessarily to change our ontological definitions, but to clarify them in order to fit the phenomena we experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean, for this talk. Welcome everyone who joined in meantime. It's nice to have you here. Now we will kick off with the questions, and let me organize these questions into 3 groups. Now we'll first have the questions from the participants online. Do we have any questions here? Anyone? If you have any question to Jean, just feel free to come here and ask. Anyone, please don't be shy. There are not many people here in Krakow. Most people join online, but still, if there are no questions, please, participants on WebEx, if you have any question, please unmute yourself, ask your question, and mute yourself again, all right? And please don't be shy. I see some of you want to ask the questions, so go ahead. Wojciech, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't get very clearly, but I would be very interested in the definition of the soul that you referred to. How do you understand soul, the soul in this in the context of your presentation?
Is this okay? Very good. Okay. Apologies for that. So thank you for that. Well, the primary aim of my presentation was, first of all, to show that these theories in physicalist literature do affect and do influence dualism or holomorphic theories. Personally, I wanted to tend towards the Aristotelian view of soul. Now, I think, and maybe I alluded to it too briefly towards the end, but I think there is a way in which we could insert a divide between what is, participating in my cognition that is external to my body, while still ascertaining that the soul is one entity with my body. And so, if I were to ask on a personal level, I would tend towards an Aristotelian conception of soul. However, at least the greater aim of my paper, my presentation, is to show that at least I think different positions can dialogue with this sort of, let's call it a problem, or with this issue within physicalist literature, and come with their own ideas. So, for example, I kind of dismiss Baker's view. Now, Baker in a way doesn't conceive of soul. She merely talks of mind. In fact, so she is what is called a Christian physicalist, which I have a bit of questions about. But anyway, so at least the conception of soul is an Aristotelian view of soul, and not a Cartesian view of mind, which is sometimes interchangeably used with soul. Maybe that was a personal peeve that sort of this interrelationship, coextension of the words mind and soul to refer to the same entity, which I think is slightly misleading and can cause problems.
I have another question. Here's Marcin Podbielski from Ignatianum. Sorry for not showing up in person in face. It's quite an early hour. Just a very short one. If you consider soul in terms of faculties, such as mind, but the faculty is mind rather than cognitive faculty, you move your idea of soul closer actually towards the Neoplatonic view of soul, which Aquinas did share and did know quite a lot about, basically through Augustine. And they have quite an interesting argument about soul as related to body on the one hand, and soul as relating to itself on the other. In Neoplatonism, soul, in order to move entire body, in order to present in the matter, must be present identically and completely everywhere. All differences in soul are differences of faculties rather than differences of parts. And it was very consciously done. They did oppose Stoics, who saw soul as this octopus with 8 legs and one central ruling faculty. This was a very materialistic view of soul in which mind, as the ruling faculty, could be separated physically from other parts. Here, we have one faculty, which is a capacity of the soul, omnipresent with the soul. It can be logically distinguished from its other activities. But first, it's actually present everywhere. Second, this is the most important faculty in this kind of soul we are talking about. And actually, this is the organizing faculty. So if you accept this vision of the soul, can you really separate the soul as principle, including intellective principle, from mind, other as actuality, first actuality using Aristotelian terms, from second actuality? Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll try my best to reply. There is a temptation to divide the soul in the sense of there is a temptation because we look at our body, and we can mentally divide our body into parts. I can imagine my body without my arm or without my legs or with just my head, for example. There is a temptation to think of the soul as filling up the space of my body, which is a temptation. And in a way, I think with Swinburne goes into, I think, in more detail. So, for example, Swinburne, which again is more dualist, well, he says himself it's a Cartesian dualist position. Swinburne speaks of the location of the soul and speaks at great length on the location of the soul. So he thinks the soul is located in that part of the brain where, the physical brain, where they causally affect one another. Now, if we're to stick to Aristotle does not speak of a location of the soul. So in a way, it's important that sort of, even in this, when the discussion is going on, we realize that there is this distinction. So there is no location of the soul. So what are we to make of the interaction when the soul, which has no location in this sense, interacts with the body or with other parts? Now this is the problem, I think. So because you mentioned, when the soul interacts with the soul itself, or when the soul interacts with the body. Now this is maybe, at least what I'm trying to present, is the third problem, when the soul interacts with parts external to the organic body, which participate in cognition. So I have this, sort of, what position are we going to say? Are we going to say, because these external entities, my phone, which is over here, I'm writing on a piece of paper, distributed cognition wants to say that these parts are part of my mind. So it is maybe a relationship between three that we are trying to elucidate. whatever our position is between these external objects, between the mind and the soul. So I think the Aristotelian position is better because mind becomes a subordinate faculty of the soul. So if we were to, put them on a scale, what is more important is the soul for Aristotle. The mind is one of the faculties. And what I briefly alluded to is this difference that Aristotle makes between the active and the passive intellect. It's a very controversial part wherein Aristotle seems to give the impression that the active intellect can exist separately of the soul. And I think if this is developed, there is a way maybe in which there can be some form of reconciliation by still accepting the fact that distributed cognition is a phenomena that exists. If you want to do that, obviously you can disagree with distributed cognition altogether. But at least what I'm trying to say is, listen, there is a way that these two phenomena can go together, can hold hands. And one is accepting distributed cognition, and the other is saying, listen, there is an Aristotelian soul which has one of these faculties, which is the active intellect, which can exist independently or outside of the soul-body relationship. So I think that is where I wanted to keep my sort of strict discussion, but I don't know if that was a good enough reply to the question.